Anxiety doesn't stand a chance against these Stoic techniques. What if that constant, humming buzz of anxiety in your head isn't actually your fault? For years, I was convinced it was just a part of my personality. This background static of overwhelm, this feeling of being crushed by things I couldn't possibly control, it was just exhausting. If you've ever felt that way, drained, mentally cluttered, and powerless against your own thoughts, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. For me, that feeling dictated my entire life. It chose my friends, it picked my career path, or really, the path of least resistance, and it kept me playing small. I was living in a cage built from what-ifs and should-haves. But then, I stumbled upon a blueprint left behind by the ancient Stoics, people like emperors, playwrights, and former slaves who navigated plagues, wars, and exile. They put forward a radical idea, that peace isn't found by changing the world around you, but by changing your mind. They argued that most of our suffering doesn't come from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events. Skeptical, but honestly pretty desperate, I decided to put their 2-0-year-old promise to the test. I dedicated 30 days to living by their rules, applying their ancient wisdom to my very modern problems. Can a philosophy from a time of swords and sandals really bring peace to a world of endless notifications and 24/7 news cycles? This is the story of that experiment. Let's find out if anxiety really stands a chance against these techniques. The breaking point and the challenge. My breaking point wasn't some big, dramatic explosion. It was more like a slow erosion. It was the 1,000th time I replayed an awkward conversation in my head. It was that gut-wrenching dread that showed up with every single email notification. It was realizing I was spending more time worrying about my life than actually living it. Anxiety had become my default operating system, and it was buggy, slow, and constantly crashing. I was so worn out from the mental gymnastics that I knew something had to change. That's when I found the Stoics. I started with Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who wrote his private meditations while managing a sprawling empire and fighting military campaigns during a devastating plague. In his writings, he explored the idea of discarding anxiety by understanding it was a product of his own perceptions, something internal, not something forced on him by the outside world. That idea was electrifying. What if anxiety wasn't some monster I had to fight, but an internal program I could rewrite? This wasn't just abstract philosophy. It felt like a practical toolkit for mental resilience. And so, the 30-day Stoic challenge was born. The goal wasn't to eliminate feelings, but to master my response to them, to build an inner citadel, a fortress of the mind that external chaos couldn't breach. I set out 7 core rules for myself, each based on a key Stoic technique. These would be my guideposts for the next month. The 30-day challenge rules. Practice the dichotomy of control. Every day, I'd consciously separate what was within my control from what was not. Journal like an emperor. I'd spend 15 minutes each evening reflecting on my day, my actions, and my judgments. Embrace negative visualization. I'd spend a few minutes each morning thinking about what could go wrong, not to worry, but to prepare. Live in the present moment. Whenever anxiety spiked, I'd ground myself in the here and now. Schedule voluntary discomfort. Once a week, I'd intentionally do something hard to build resilience. Reframe my impressions. I'd actively challenge my initial negative reactions and question if they were true. Act with virtue. I'd make decisions based on the 4 Stoic virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, not on fear. The stage was set. I had my rules and a desperate need for change. I had no idea if it would work, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't anxiety. It was hope. The journey. Techniques in action. Technique 1. The dichotomy of control, reclaiming my energy. This was rule number 1, and it quickly became the foundation for everything. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus essentially said, some things are up to us, and some things are not. It sounds almost insultingly simple, but when you truly internalize it, it changes everything. My first real test came on day 3. I got a blunt, critical email from a senior colleague about a project I'd poured weeks into. Immediately, the familiar anxiety spiral kicked in. My heart started hammering. My mind raced. They think I'm incompetent. I'm going to get fired. My career is over. But then, I made myself pause. Okay, apply the rule. I grabbed a notebook and drew a line right down the middle of the page. On one side, I wrote, out of my control. My colleagues' mood and their perception of me, their final opinion of my work, whether they talk about this with other people, the ultimate success of the project. On the other side, I wrote, within my control, how I choose to interpret this email, making my response professional and thorough, my willingness to learn from the feedback, the effort I put into improving the project from here, my own self-worth, which is not determined by one person's email. Looking at that list, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. All my anxiety was tangled up in the left side of the page, the things I had zero power over. All my ability to act was on the right. I couldn't control their opinion, but I could absolutely control my response. I took a deep breath, reread the email for its actual substance instead of its tone, and drafted a calm, constructive reply. The anxiety didn't just vanish, but its power was gone. It was no longer a tidal wave, it was just a ripple. This single exercise, repeated day after day, started freeing up an unbelievable amount of mental energy I'd been wasting on things I couldn't control. Technique 2. Journaling like an emperor, my nightly audit. Some of the most powerful Stoic texts we have are personal journals. Marcus Aurelius wasn't writing for an audience. He was writing for himself, to process his day and hold himself accountable. So, every night, I sat down and did my own kind of mental audit. I answered 3 simple questions, inspired by Seneca and other Stoics. Where did I go wrong today? What did I do right? How can I improve tomorrow? At first, it felt kind of awkward. My entries were shallow. I got anxious in a meeting. I was productive this afternoon. I can be more focused. But as I stuck with it, the practice got deeper. On day 9, I wrote about snapping at a customer service agent on the phone. In the "Where did I go wrong?" section, I didn't just write down what happened, I really dissected it. I realized my anger wasn't about the agent at all. It was because the call made me late for something else, a situation that I had created with my own poor planning. The journal became a mirror, showing me my own patterns. It helped me see that my emotional upsets were almost always the result of my own judgments and actions, not outside events. Seneca believed we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and my journal proved him right, night after night. It wasn't a diary of events. It was a logbook of my mind, a tool that slowly untangled the knots of anxiety and showed me the source of the friction in my life. Technique 3. Negative visualization, preparing for the worst. This technique, also known as premeditatio malorum, or the premeditation of evils, sounded completely backwards. Why would someone with anxiety want to spend time imagining worst-case scenarios? But the Stoics weren't trying to be pessimistic. They were trying to build a kind of psychological immunity. I had a presentation on day 15 that I was absolutely dreading. My anxiety was fixated on everything that could go wrong. The tech could fail. My mind could go blank. I could get a brutal question from the audience. Normally, I would try to just push these thoughts away, which, of course, only made them stronger. This time, I tried the Stoic approach. I sat down and vividly imagined the worst realistic outcome. The projector dies. I completely forget a key point. Someone asks a question I have no idea how to answer. I pictured myself standing there, fumbling, feeling embarrassed. Then I asked the crucial follow-up question, and then what? Could I survive it? The answer, obviously, was yes. If the tech failed, I could make a joke and just carry on without slides. If I forgot a point, I could pause, take a sip of water, and collect myself. If I got a question I couldn't answer, I could just honestly say, "That's a great point. I'll have to look into that and get back to you." By staring the worst-case scenario in the face, I stripped it of its power. The fear of the unknown became a plan for a known possibility. When presentation day came, I was still nervous, but the terror was gone. I had already faced the worst in my mind and knew it was manageable. This isn't about expecting failure. It's about building the confidence that you can handle it if it comes. Technique 4. Living in the present moment, the grounding anchor. Anxiety almost never lives in the present moment. It's a disease of the future, constantly fueled by what if. The Stoics knew this thousands of years ago, and they stressed that the only time we ever truly have is right now. To put this into practice, I used a modern technique that pairs perfectly with this Stoic idea. Whenever I felt that familiar wave of anxiety rising, which for me often happened in crowded places like the grocery store, I'd stop and ground myself. Instead of letting my mind spiral, I would plant my feet and use the 5-4-3-2-1 method. I would silently name 5 things I could see: the texture on a cereal box, a reflection on the floor, the color of a sign. 4 things I could feel: the cold metal of the cart handle, my shoes on the tile, the fabric of my jeans. 3 things I could hear: the beep of a scanner, the rumble of a cartwheel, a distant announcement. 2 things I could smell: the scent of bread from the bakery, the faint smell of cleaning solution. 1 thing I could taste: the lingering taste of my morning coffee. This simple act would pull me out of the chaotic future playing out in my head and anchor me firmly in the physical reality of the present. It was a pattern interrupt for my anxiety. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to embrace what was right in front of him. This technique became my practical way of doing just that, proving that a calm mind is often just one sensory inventory away. By the way, if this journey is resonating with you, and you've ever felt that struggle with the constant chatter of anxiety, do me a quick favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel reach more people who might need to hear this. And I'm curious, which of these techniques so far seems like it could make the biggest difference for you? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, back to the challenge. Technique 5. Voluntary discomfort, building mental calluses. The Stoics believed that a person who has only ever known comfort is fragile. They can't handle hardship because they've never practiced for it. To counter this, they practiced voluntary discomfort. I decided my weekly discomforts would be small, but meaningful. On the first Saturday, I took a cold shower. Not just a cool one, a breathtakingly teeth-chattering cold one. My entire body screamed, "No!" My mind flooded with excuses. But I stayed under the water for 2 full minutes. When I got out, the feeling was incredible. It wasn't just the physical rush, it was the psychological win. I had just done something genuinely difficult, purely by choice. Another week, I intentionally left my phone at home for a whole day. In our hyper-connected world, that felt like a real hardship. I felt phantom vibrations in my pocket for hours. I had this constant urge to check something, anything, but by the end of the day, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. I was actually present with the people I was with. My mind was quieter. These small acts, fasting from a meal, waking up an hour earlier than needed, always taking the stairs, were like training in a gym for my mind. They built mental calluses. They proved to me on a deep gut level that I could endure more than I thought. When real, involuntary discomforts showed up in my life, they just seemed less scary because I had been training for them all along. Technique 6. Reframe my impressions. The power of perception. This technique is maybe the most mentally challenging, but it's also the most liberating. Epictetus famously taught that it's not things that upset us, but our judgments about them. Our anxiety, our anger, our fear, they're all products of the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening. My big test for this came during a miserable traffic jam on day 23. I was going to be late for a friend's birthday dinner. My instant, automatic impression was, this is a disaster. It's so unfair. My whole evening is ruined. My shoulders tensed up, my jaw clenched. I was miserable. Then I remembered the rule. Challenge the impression. Is it really a disaster? No, a disaster is a hurricane or a health crisis. This is just traffic. Is it unfair? Traffic isn't personal. It's not happening to me. It's just happening. Is my evening ruined? Only if I choose to show up angry and stressed. Alternatively, this is just an unexpected block of free time. I decided to reframe the story. Instead of I'm trapped in traffic, I chose I now have 30 minutes of uninterrupted time. I put on a podcast I'd been meaning to listen to. I made a hands-free call to another friend to wish them well. By the time I got to the dinner, my mood was light. I was 20 minutes late, but I was calm and happy. I didn't change the external event. The traffic was still there. But by changing my internal judgment about it, I completely transformed my emotional experience. I realized I had the power to have no opinion about it, as Marcus Aurelius would say, and in that space I found peace. Technique 7. Act with virtue, the ultimate compass. The final rule really tied everything together. For the Stoics, the ultimate goal of life is to live with virtue. They defined virtue through 4 key qualities: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Anxiety so often comes from chasing things we can't control, like other people's approval, wealth, or status. Focusing on virtue shifts your goalpost from the external to the internal. This became my compass for tough decisions. In the last week of the challenge, I faced a choice at work. I could stay quiet about a flaw I saw in a plan from a senior colleague to avoid conflict, or I could speak up, risking their annoyance but potentially saving the team a lot of time and effort down the road. The old, anxious me would have stayed silent. The fear of social discomfort would have won, hands down. But instead, I asked myself, what is the virtuous thing to do here? Wisdom suggested the flaw was real, and it would be foolish to ignore it. Courage demanded that I speak up, even though it felt uncomfortable. Justice meant being fair to my colleagues and the company, who would be affected by a bad plan. Temperance required me to deliver the feedback calmly and respectfully, without any arrogance. I chose to speak up. I did it privately and constructively, and the feedback was surprisingly well received. But here's the most important part. Even if it hadn't been, I knew I had made the right choice. My sense of success wasn't tied to their reaction, which is uncontrollable, but to my action, which was controllable. By focusing on acting with virtue, I had freed myself from the anxiety of chasing a specific outcome. My goal was no longer to be liked or to succeed in a conventional way, but simply to do the right thing. And that is a goal that is always, always within your power. The transformation and conclusion. So, after 30 days, what happened? Am I cured of anxiety? No. And that was never the point. Anxiety is a natural human emotion. It's part of our evolutionary wiring. What changed wasn't the presence of anxiety, but my relationship with it. The constant, deafening static in my head has been turned down to a quiet hum. Sometimes it gets louder, sure, but now I have the tools to manage the volume. Before this experiment, anxiety was my master. It dictated my choices and made my world small. I felt fragile, totally at the mercy of every external event and internal whim. Today, I feel solid. I feel like I'm standing on firm ground for the first time. The Stoic practices built that inner citadel, brick by brick. The dichotomy of control gave me my energy back. Journaling gave me clarity. Negative visualization gave me courage. Voluntary discomfort gave me resilience. I learned that freedom isn't the absence of hardship, but the ability to respond to it with wisdom and grace. I learned that peace isn't some lottery ticket you might win one day. It's a skill you practice, a muscle you build. The most profound shift was truly understanding what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote about discarding anxiety because it was within him. I finally get it. The anxiety was never in the traffic jam, the email, or the presentation. It was in my judgment of them, and because the judgment was mine, I had the power to change it. This journey taught me that this 2,000-year-old philosophy isn't just a collection of nice quotes. It's a robust, practical, and deeply empowering operating system for the human mind. It doesn't promise a life without problems, but it offers something far more valuable: the strength to face whatever comes your way with calm and character. Now, a quick but important note. These practices were incredibly helpful for me in managing everyday anxiety. But if you are struggling with a clinical anxiety disorder, these tools can be a great supplement, but they are not a replacement for professional medical advice or therapy. Please, always take care of yourself and seek out the help you need. My 30-day challenge is over, but the practice has just begun. This isn't a one-time fix. It is, as Seneca said, a lifelong craft. And now, I want to extend a challenge to you. You don't have to do all 7 things at once. Just pick one. Maybe it's journaling for 5 minutes before you go to bed. Maybe it's practicing the dichotomy of control the next time you feel that wave of stress. Choose one technique that resonated with you and just try it for 1 week. Let me know in the comments which technique you're going to try first. Sharing your intention is a powerful first step. And if you found value in this journey and want to explore more timeless wisdom for modern problems, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. There's a modern saying, inspired by these ancient ideas, that I love: a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a person perfected without trials. Your anxiety is not a life sentence. It is friction, it is a trial, and it's an opportunity to build a mind that is resilient, peaceful, and truly free. Start building yours today.